So recently, I've been very critical in my take on how a lot of Western leaders have responded to the rising threats of, I was going to say Russia and China, but specifically China. I feel that too many continue to sit on the fence and have simply not shown enough assertiveness and action in standing up to this regime and their lies. But one leader who stands out is the young mayor of Prague. He's only 38 years old, and his name is, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Zdeněk Hřib. Zdeněk Hřib. If I'm pronouncing that wrong, please excuse me. My Czech is, well, it's non-existent. But I've been increasingly hearing about this man because he has consistently stood up for democratic values, and now his life has been threatened by the Russian regime. And it for the following reason. We'll read out the report, then speak a bit more about this mayor. This is by Mark Bennett in Moscow. The Czech Republic is sending security service officers to Moscow to protect its diplomats amid mounting tensions with Russia over the removal of a Soviet-era statue in Prague. Thomas Petricek, the Czech foreign minister, said Prague was increasing safety measures after nationalist activists threw a smoke bomb into the grounds of the Czech embassy in Moscow. They also let off with smoke bombs outside the Czech embassy consulate, the Czech consulate in St. Petersburg. The activist members of a group called Other Russia said the actions were revenge for the removal of a Soviet-era statue of Marshal Ivan Konev, a Soviet military commander. Russia said the Czech Republic's decision to take down the statue violated a 1993 friendship treaty between the two countries. Sergei Shoigu, the Russian defense minister, asked investigators to launch criminal proceedings against the Czech officials responsible. Mr. Petricek, 38, called Russia's plans absurd. Zdeněk Hřib, the mayor of Prague, and Ondřej Kolar, a district mayor, were last month put under police protection amid reports that Russia had dispatched an agent armed with ricin to kill them. Russia called the allegations fake. Mr. Hřib, 38, renamed a square in front of the Russian embassy in Prague after Boris Nemtsov, a murdered Kremlin critic, a move that Mr. Kolar had earlier backed. Now, last year, Mr. Hřib also stood up to China, and it was in this context, and this is from the Wikipedia article. In 2018, during a meeting with foreign diplomats in Prague, Hřib was asked by the Chinese ambassador to the Czech Republic to expel the representative of Taiwan, and Hřib refused to do so. He has criticised a clause of the sister city agreement between Prague and Beijing that references the One China principle, and he stated that his policy is a complicated matter of foreign politics between countries and therefore has no place in the sister cities agreement. And that's a very important point because the whole idea of sister cities is meant to be cultural, not overtly political. And that's clearly yet another example of how the Chinese regime tries to bully foreign countries into accepting its will and accepting the one child policy, the one China policy. And in December 2019, Hřib was among four mayors of the Visegrad Group, capitals of Prague, Warsaw, Bratislava, and Budapest, who signed a so-called Pact of Free Cities that agrees to protect common values of freedom, human dignity, democracy, equality, rule of law, social justice, tolerance, and cultural diversity. Now, specifically, I'm really admire his stance in standing up to Beijing, and I think a lot of other Western leaders can learn from that. But just for now, I want to focus on the issue with Russia. It's not surprising that Kremlin thugs are now threatening Mr. Hřib because this is what they do to any critics. And for Moscow to say this is nonsense, look at Salisbury. Look at the many, many other examples of Kremlin critics dying in unsavory circumstances. So I think such threats do need to be taken very seriously. But in the context of VE Day commemorations, I've just looked at his Facebook page, and this is not a populist who's just making idle rants. This man, judges his word very carefully. He said that we recognize the sacrifice of the Soviet Union. We recognize the victory they secured in 1945. But the fact is, for millions of Europeans, I mean, we rightly celebrate it in Britain and in France and in Western Europe, but for millions of Europeans living east of the Iron Wall, the Iron Curtain, there was nothing to celebrate because they basically went from one totalitarian regime, fascism, to another, communism, and they suffered profoundly under both. That should never be forgotten. So the fact the Czechs removed these Soviet era statues, I think, is a very admirable move. Why should those statues be there to remind people of how they suffered under communism? And they did. So Russia can protest as much as it wants, but they can have their Soviet statues within Russian borders. But what right do they have to demand that the Czechs or the Hungarians or the Poles or the Lithuanians have these monuments? Honoring people who were symbolic and personified subjugation that they faced. Um, So I don't think that is disrespecting Soviet sacrifice in the Second World War. Rather, I think it is acknowledging the way Warsaw Pact countries suffered. So, I've been very critical of a lot of Western leaders, but this man is one person who stands out, and I really think a lot of people can learn from him. So thank you, Mayor Zdeněk Hřib and others who speak out. Um, you stand out. You represent the capital city of a small country, but you've shown more courage, frankly, than a lot of British and American politicians in this regard. And thank you. It's so, so very important. And the fact that Beijing and Moscow just make these demands just shows their bullying nature.